Pretty much all of the stories we cover on this channel involve investigators working through some sort of puzzle. Now, most of the time I mean that in the metaphorical sense, chasing down leads and putting together evidence in order to solve a case. However, in today's story, detectives quite literally had a puzzle on their hands, a clue that they had to painstakingly assemble piece by piece. That puzzle would not only turn out to be the crux of the entire case, it would also reveal a twist so awful that it would absolutely devastate an entire family. The night of September 25th, 1996, started out as an exciting one for Emily Garza. It was the evening before her 4th birthday, and like most kids her age, she was highly anticipating her special day. Emily, along with her 2 younger brothers, lived with their parents Jose and Nicole in Los Angeles. The family of 5 had a modest but nicely kept home in the city's Silmar neighborhood, which is located in the San Fernando Valley. The Garzas were well known and well liked by pretty much everyone who knew them in the area. Jose and Nicole were both practicing lawyers and were each successful in their chosen fields of focus. Jose was the deputy attorney for the city's San Fernando office. He was essentially the second in command and was responsible for handling criminal prosecutions of misdemeanors, as well as a variety of civil cases. Nicole, on the other hand, specialized in family law and had worked for a number of respected firms. In fact, this is how she had met Jose in the first place. Jose had been previously married, and she had represented him during his divorce. At the time, he was in his mid-40s and she was in her late 20s, but they quickly felt a connection, had fallen in love, and started their family shortly afterwards. Despite their unconventional start and the age gap between them, Jose and Nicole bonded over their shared sensibilities and backgrounds. Neither of them had come from money, and they had both worked incredibly hard to get where they were. Nicole was the daughter of a single mother and school teacher, and from an early age had stood out for her intellect. She always excelled academically, but also had a way with people, something which helped her greatly in the courtroom. Jose had put himself through law school by working nights as a fast food restaurant manager. He passed the bar on his first try, and not long after began working his way up through the San Fernando courthouse. Like Nicole, Jose was also very good at what he did, but he was definitely more the type to shy away from the limelight. Even when he won large or important cases, he generally didn't like to make a big fuss about it. He was a pretty private person, and the sense of accomplishment he got from doing the job well was more than enough for him. Jose and Nicole had a lot of responsibilities at work, which meant that they were generally pretty busy. However, they still tried their best to prioritize family. Neighbors would see them walking around the block all together in the afternoons, with Jose often carrying one of the kids on his back. Aside from preparing for Emily's birthday the following day, that Wednesday had been like any other. After Jose and Nicole came home from work, the family went through their usual mix of weeknight routines. They had dinner together, did a few chores around the house, relaxed a bit, and before long it was time for bed. As Emily was tucked in that night, she was thinking about all of the things she was looking forward to. You know that feeling you only get as a kid where you're so excited that morning just can't come soon enough? Unfortunately for Emily, though, her dreams were about to be both figuratively and literally shattered. Just a couple of hours after she and her brothers dozed off to sleep, they would be awoken by the terrifying sounds of gunshots coming from inside their house. At around 10:50 p.m. that night, the LAPD received a 911 call from the Garza residence. The person on the other end was frantic and said that they had just been the victims of a home invasion. Not only that, but someone had been shot and was seriously injured. When officers arrived at the scene, they were immediately led to the Garza's garage, where they found a person lying on the floor with a single gunshot wound to their torso. However, it wasn't a member of the Garza family. Instead, this was a completely unknown person, one who was dressed in all dark clothing and wearing a hat, face covering, a black wig, and a pair of goggle-like glasses. On the ground close by was a .38 caliber revolver. Now, it was immediately clear that something pretty wild had gone down here. There was blood all over the floor and bullet holes in the walls, but given this person's injuries, authorities had to act fast. Before they could really begin examining the scene further, they had to let paramedics in who rushed this mystery person off to the hospital. As soon as this was done, police began talking to Jose Garza, who was the one who had called 911 and who said that he was the main person involved in everything that had happened. Jose said that he had been in his garage that night when he had been ambushed by the unknown intruder. The only reason he had escaped with his life was because he was also armed with his own weapon. Afterwards, he said he had run back inside and gotten his kids and his wife Nicole in the same room together where they had all waited until help had arrived. Officers could tell that the whole family was shaken, especially the Garza's young children. It's not hard to understand why. Imagine being a kid asleep in bed and suddenly you hear gunshots and then your father running through the house screaming. Unfortunately, though, it was still going to be a very long night for all of them. Even though there was good reason to believe Jose had acted in self-defense, someone had still been shot, so the situation needed to be investigated. Authorities also had to figure out why all of this had happened in the first place, so the 3 Garza children were sent to stay with a neighbor while Jose and Nicole were brought down to the station for further questioning. These interviews were conducted separately, which is protocol, though detectives focused more on their conversations with Jose first, since they figured he probably had more information. They started by asking for a detailed rundown of the events leading up to the shooting. Jose said that after putting their kids to bed that evening, he and Nicole had enjoyed a little time to themselves. They had talked for a bit and had gotten intimate, but before going to sleep, Nicole was feeling a little peckish. She asked if he would run and get her one of her diet ice cream bars, which they kept in the freezer in the garage. He agreed, since he was going to get up and go to the bathroom anyway. Jose explained that while he was in the bathroom, though, his 3 dogs started barking. He said that this put him on high alert, so he grabbed a .45 caliber handgun that he kept in there and continued heading out towards the garage. The second he opened the door and turned on the light, he came face to face with the mystery intruder, who he described as looking like some kind of ninja. He barely had time to process any of this before the person had opened fire on him. After that, it was basically a matter of luck. Their aim had been bad, and his had been good. All of their shots missed, while he managed to hit the attacker in the torso. After that, he ran inside yelling for his wife and kids. He said that they were all terrified and none of them really knew what to do. Nicole completely froze and couldn't even call 911, but his adrenaline kind of just kicked in and he took over. When Nicole was questioned about all of this, she didn't have as much information, but her story matched Jose's. It also seemed to align with what investigators were finding back at the crime scene. Most of the bullet holes were in the wall or door leading from the garage into the kitchen. In other words, they had been fired in the direction where Jose would have come in. With all of these details, it was beginning to look like this had been a targeted shooting. There was nothing missing from the house, and it appeared that the ninja, as Jose had described them, was hiding in the garage waiting to attack. However, there were already a couple of things that detectives were wondering about. The first had to do with how and why Jose had armed himself in the first place that evening. Jose said that the dogs had barked, which put him on edge, but he also mentioned grabbing his gun from the bathroom. Investigators thought this was a little strange, so they asked him about it. Jose basically said that he was just kind of a paranoid dude, mainly because of his job. He may have handled misdemeanor prosecutions, but in his time with the city attorney's office, he had dealt with his fair share of drug dealers, gang members, and other dangerous criminals. He explained that he actually had guns stashed all around the house, and that the one in the bathroom just happened to be the closest. This gave detectives an idea. They asked Jose, is there anyone you can think of that you dealt with at work that might have done this? Maybe someone that you prosecuted that might have held a grudge? Jose thought about it, but he said nothing like that really came to mind. Certainly, he didn't think there was anyone who hated him enough to put him and his family in mortal danger like this. While this was an obvious theory because of Jose's line of work, there was actually another reason to doubt it. This leads me to the other major thing that police were curious about, which is the lack of forced entry at the crime scene. Based on what they found, all of the doors and windows at the Garza home, including those in the garage, were properly locked and secured. This led to a question. How had the mysterious shooter actually gotten inside? Of course, there was another possibility here, one that up until now authorities hadn't really considered. Yes, this looked like a targeted attack, but maybe Jose wasn't actually the intended target. Remember, Nicole was also a lawyer and practiced family law. She specifically handled a lot of divorces, not necessarily something that's known for making you a lot of friends. Just as this idea was coming to them, police would receive a crucial new piece of information that would throw them for a loop. The shooter? Well, it turned out that she was a woman. The news that the attacker that had ambushed Jose Garza in his garage was a woman definitely caught authorities off guard. You might be thinking that sounds ridiculous, but as I mentioned before, things were hectic when police first got to the scene. Because of the shooter's injuries, they had been rushed out of there pretty quickly, and with the disguise on top of this, they kind of just assumed the attacker was male. That being said, this revelation opened up some new lines of inquiry. By this point, detectives knew that Jose had been married before, and they also knew that Nicole had handled his previous divorce. So they asked each one of them, could this have been one of Jose's exes, or maybe someone else that would have had access to your house? They also asked another obvious question. Are either one of you having an affair? Both Jose and Nicole vehemently denied anything like this was going on. Jose was also adamant that he didn't think this had anything to do with a prior relationship. Really, he said, there was no one in his life that he thought was capable of something like this. As this part of the conversation was happening, though, one of the detectives that was interviewing Nicole was suddenly called out of the room. He was gone for several minutes, and when he returned, he had one simple question. What is your relationship with your sister like? So it turned out that back when the shooter had initially been taken to the hospital, one of the paramedics had notified police about a plastic key ring that was around her wrist. There were several keys on it, but two of them in particular stood out. One was for the Garza family's garage, and the other was for a white 1992 Ford SUV. After a little searching, officers had managed to locate the SUV, which was parked about a block away from the crime scene. When they ran the license plates of the vehicle, it came back as registered to Nicole's older sister, 34-year-old Lynette LaFontaine Trujillo. When asked about Lynette, Nicole said that she got along with her sister pretty well. They had their ups and downs, and Lynette had definitely had her share of struggles, but, it was nothing out of the ordinary. Jose had even less to say. He didn't think Lynette was the most reliable person around, but other than that, he didn't believe that there was any bad blood between them. Now, Lynette's keys explained how she had gotten into the Garza's house, but police still had no clue as to why. Like, what prompted her to go into their garage late at night and try to kill her brother-in-law? Hoping for further insights, investigators turned to a few extended family members and asked about Lynette. What they discovered was pretty interesting. Detectives learned that Lynette and Nicole didn't have the usual sisterly dynamic. Even though Lynette was older, she really didn't give off that vibe. She always seemed to be the one struggling and needing help, whether it was with drugs, her eating disorder, her finances, or the men in her life. Lynette had 4 boys, all of whom lived with their fathers. She worked 2 jobs as a waitress, but she often had trouble making ends meet, and lived with her and Nicole's mother. Family members said that it wasn't that Lynette was a bad person. It's just that she never seemed to be able to manage responsibility well. She was very artistic and had a lot of charisma and personality, but despite this, she always had problems with her self-esteem. On the other hand, it seemed like everything always worked out for Nicole. She had that same gift for charming people as her sister, but she also excelled at basically whatever she tried. She had the career, she had this beautiful family. She was kind of the golden child. As you might imagine, after hearing this, detectives started to wonder if there was a motive in here. Maybe Lynette was jealous of her sister's perfect life. Obviously, the easiest way to explore this theory would be to question Lynette directly, but up until now, police had understandably been unable to speak to her because of her injuries. However, that was about to change when they got an unexpected call from the hospital. Little did authorities know, though, it wasn't going to be the last twist in the case. That call investigators received from the hospital was from doctors who said that they had an update about Lynette's condition. While she was still considered critical, she was stable, and it seemed like they might be able to wake her up long enough for an interview. Detectives ended their conversations with Nicole and Jose and rushed over to the hospital, where things were looking promising. Lynette was awake, and though she was intubated, meaning she had a tube in her throat and she couldn't actually talk to them, she was still able to write. The detectives were even more encouraged when they saw Lynette kind of waving them over, so they immediately handed her a pen and a pad of paper. Slowly but surely, she started writing something. At this point, a ton of questions were running through investigators' heads. Like, were they right? Was this a jealousy thing? Was Jose the target? Was it Nicole? Or was this something else entirely? Unfortunately, all of this excitement would be short-lived. When Lynette handed back the paper, there were only 2 words written on it. They read, "Diet Coke," followed by a question mark. Moments later, Lynette fell back into unconsciousness. Understandably, this was a frustrating series of events, but as I hinted at before, it wasn't the last curveball the detectives would be thrown. No, that would come a few hours later, when they were notified about another development, and this one would prove to be far more consequential. So, I mentioned before that police had found Lynette's white Ford SUV parked near the crime scene, but what I didn't tell you was that they actually also found something in there. While searching the vehicle, they came across a plastic bag that had been left near the passenger seat. Inside was a whole bunch of little ripped-up pieces of paper. At first, police really weren't sure if this was anything, but they could tell that there had originally been something written or printed on this paper. That wasn't all. In addition to being ripped up, these shreds of paper had clearly been soaked in water. In other words, Lynette had tried to destroy what was originally on there. The bag of wet paper scraps was sent off to the crime lab, where technicians had spent a considerable amount of time drying them and then attempting to reassemble the original pages. After a painstaking process, they had been successful. As they jigsawed the pieces together, authorities realized that these scraps of paper were parts of several letters, some of which had been written by hand and some of which had been typed. When they were put all back into place, they were able to read what was on them, and what they found was absolutely chilling. Now, before we get into exactly what was in these letters, I should mention that for a while before this, there were a couple of things that had been bothering investigators. Things that had to do specifically with their interviews with Nicole. From the very beginning of their conversations after the shooting, detectives had been struck by her body language. Jose had been really tense when he was brought in. He immediately seemed very concerned and wanted to know whether they were considering what had happened to be a justified use of self-defense. However, Nicole was the complete opposite. For someone who had just supposedly been through a traumatic event, she didn't seem to be bothered by anything that was going on. I always try to be careful to point out whenever we get onto the topic of trauma responses that people don't always react the way that we would expect them to after going through a scary situation like this. And that this in and of itself is not an indication of guilt. But in this case, there were some serious red flags. It wasn't just that Nicole was responding in an unusual way. She really didn't seem concerned about anything that had happened. Moreover, she wasn't asking a lot of questions, including in relation to things you definitely would think someone in that situation would be curious about. Case in point, when detectives started questioning her about Lynette, she never asked them why they suddenly wanted to know so much about her sister. Well, it turned out Nicole knew exactly why police were questioning her about Lynette. It was because she was the one who sent her to her family's house that night. When those letters in Lynette's SUV were pieced back together and investigators read them, they revealed that Nicole had planned this entire thing. She wanted Jose dead, and she had convinced her sister to carry out the crime for her. Some of the letters were things that Lynette had written to herself as a kind of checklist to keep the plan straight. But the vast majority of what was there were these typed instructions that had been created by Nicole. and they basically walked Lynette through start to finish everything she needed to do so that they could kill Jose and get away with it. These instructions were calculated and meticulous. They included everything from what kind of bullets to purchase and where to buy them, to where Lynette could practice shooting because she had never really used a gun before. In fact, authorities would later discover that the .38 caliber revolver that was used in the crime had come from Jose's personal collection. She had tried to kill him with one of his own guns. This also added additional context to a couple of other things that had happened that night. For starters, Nicole had sent Jose into the garage knowing that he was about to be attacked. It probably would have been successful too if the dogs hadn't started barking and Jose had heard them. And when he came back in screaming, Nicole hadn't frozen because she was too scared to call 911. That was just her realizing that her plan had failed. Jose was still alive. By the way, I'm just scraping the tip of the iceberg here in terms of how detailed Nicole's instructions were. She had thought of everything from how they would handle the police interviews afterwards to the exact order and timeline in which Lynette needed to complete all of her tasks. Nicole had even accurately predicted that one of the first theories police would look at was that Jose had been targeted based on his job as a city attorney. She believed that if they were able to pull this off without leaving behind any obvious evidence, the investigation would quickly die. Now, you're probably wondering, why was Lynette willing to go along with this? Well, part of it was self-interest. Jose had a life insurance policy on him, and Nicole was intending to collect the payout after he was dead. Nicole said once they had that money, they would be set for life. In her words, they could, quote, get out of the rat race, and they would never have to work again. As I mentioned before, Lynette was in a pretty precarious position in life, financially and otherwise, and Nicole really promised her the world. Part of the letter reads, quote, I can get you out of debt, get your boobs, get you off the drugs, get you on Prozac, get you into a profession you enjoy and which utilizes your numerous talents, get you in a mental position to spend quality regular time with your children, help you get into a residence, etc. It went further than that, though. You see, the other major part of all of this, arguably the more disturbing part, was the whole psychological aspect. In the letters, Nicole simultaneously builds her sister up emotionally while giving all of the reasons why she claims killing Jose would actually be a great thing for everyone. She asks Lynette to consider, quote, what a tremendous domino effect your action will have to better the lives of so many people, and refers to the crime as, quote, 1.5 minutes of terror and a 360-degree turnaround in your life. She finishes one by writing in all capital letters, quote, you have the mental stamina to do it and forget it. You are stronger than you give yourself credit for. You will be greatly improving the quality of your life and the lives of your children. Of course, there's another obvious question you've probably thought of by now, and it's what was so horrible about Jose that Nicole could convince her sister that killing him would better the lives of so many people? Well, here it seems that Nicole basically just threw everything at the wall to see what would stick. The list is pretty strange because it includes some very serious accusations. Claims like that Jose was sexually and mentally abusive towards her and physically and mentally abusive towards their kids. However, it also includes things like that he was, quote, teaching children to be inconsiderate and rude, and that he wasted resources on fishing. Now, the veracity of these claims was never specifically addressed in any of the sources we came across in our research, but if you ask me personally, it sounds like they were all made up. I've seen quite a few interviews with Jose's children, and none of them mentioned any kind of abuse. I just feel like that probably would have come up and they would have said something if those claims were true. I'm also basing some of this on how they talk about their father in interviews, because it's very clear that they very much love and respect him, but I'll get to more of that a little later. Anyway, after this absolute bombshell, detectives were pretty blown away, but they were also incredibly worried. As I said before, they had let Jose and Nicole go home together by this point, and Jose had no idea what kind of danger he was still in. They raced over to their house, where thankfully Jose was alive and well. At the same time, they placed Nicole under arrest. Initially, it was looking like authorities had a pretty strong case against both Nicole and Lynette. Nicole had written down her entire plan in those letters. It was essentially an instruction manual for murder. But frustratingly, a couple of important things would kind of turn all of this on its head. First, a little under 2 weeks after the crime, Lynette passed away in the hospital from the injuries she had sustained during the shooting. This meant that not only did investigators never get to fully question her, the person who had actually tried to kill Jose could no longer be held legally responsible. As a result, the only option was to go after Nicole for everything. She was charged with attempted murder and conspiracy, as well as offenses related to her sister's death. Unfortunately, there was a major problem here too. Jose, so their victim and only other witness, also wasn't sure that he wanted to participate in any of this. To say that Jose was shocked by what had happened would be an understatement. For a long time, he straight up refused to believe that Nicole could have done something like this, even after he was shown the evidence. Jose did end up cooperating with police, but it was still an open question as to whether he would help the prosecution or the defense during the trial. And there was good reason to believe that it might have been the latter. According to newspaper reports from the time, Jose stuck by Nicole for quite a while and continued to visit her in jail after her arrest. Heartbreakingly, he would often wait hours just to see her. In the end, prosecutors decided their only reliable course of action was to offer Nicole a plea deal. She accepted, pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter and attempted murder. Unfortunately, this means that we'll never truly know why Nicole did what she did. She refused to cooperate with the investigation from the start after her arrest, and obviously with the plea deal, there was no opportunity for anything else to come out that might have been revealed at trial. Nicole was sentenced to 15 years to life and was released after serving her time. The only information we could find about her online states that she later moved to Arizona, where she remarried and started a new family. At the time of this recording, it appears that she remains a free woman. It's hard not to feel outraged about this one and like justice was not adequately served. I think there's a fair argument to be made that given the relatively light sentence Nicole received, that even though she went to prison, she kind of got away with it. I think what's especially upsetting is the thought that everyone else kind of bore the brunt of the repercussions here. Lynette was manipulated and lost her life over this. Jose had his life destroyed, and both her kids and Lynette's kids lost their mothers. Meanwhile, Nicole now gets to live a relatively normal life. I hinted before that Jose's kids are pretty clear where they stand on all of this. And yeah, it doesn't seem like they've got a lot of great things to say about Nicole. I really don't blame them though, because based on what they said in the interviews I saw, Nicole really didn't even try to be a mother to them when she got out of prison. Conversely, it sounds like Jose was the bigger person in all of this in pretty much every way you could imagine. Not only did he continue to raise Emily and her brothers himself, he never tried to prevent them from having a relationship with Nicole. Jose did finally come around to accepting what had happened, but this didn't make it any less gutting. According to Emily Garza, though he tried his best to put on a brave face for them, there were a lot of nights where she heard her father alone and crying in his bedroom or the bathroom. It's just really heartbreaking to think about. Fortunately, it does seem that Jose was able to find love again. As I said before, he's a pretty private person, so there isn't a ton of information about him online. But based on what we were able to find, he eventually married a woman named Janice. According to a blurb that was written about him by his alma mater, he retired in 2013, and since then has been enjoying time with his children and grandchildren.
Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.